Uh, we've been having hosts of webinars, and after 6 months of continuously attending webinars and this thing, when I sat back and I thought about what I really learned, I realized that there is so much that I have to learn, and whatever we listen to, it gives us a sense of direction. And unless we go back and read by ourselves and form clear concepts, it doesn't really sink into us. And I have been making a lot of changes in the way I practice by listening to the experience of different people, which everyone has been so great in sharing. So I thought I picked up this topic because I was always very curious. What is really the role of a sperm? Is it just a carrier of the paternal DNA? What does it do? So when I went back and read, there were some articles which there's so much work that is being done, and so many new advances that are happening, that I thought, let me share what I learned and understood in this time that I had with me. As you all know, the World Health Organization estimates that are around 190 million people struggling with infertility worldwide. And the number of couples who do come out now compared to what it was around 20 years ago, now even men are accepting that there can be a problem with male infertility, and we are seeing couples coming. Rather than how it was around 15 to 20 years ago, where the lady would come with her mother-in-law or mom. And when we look at how much of this fertility issues is contributed by the men, and when we look at the statistics from all over the world, you can see that anywhere between 37% to 60 to 70% on the average, we can say roughly half the problem is because of pure male infertility or the male factor contributing towards the female infertility. And very interestingly, I came across this Haryana man at 96 who became the world's oldest father, who had a second child in 2 years. He was 94 when he had his first child. This was reported in October 2012, and I don't know if anyone else has broken this record, and you're welcome to tell me if it has. But do we want our fathers to be that old? Definitely not. Why is that? When we go back and look into what is the data that we have, one of the best places to get data is from the Scandinavian countries, where every record of health is there in the National Register. So Zhu et al. In 2005 analyzed data for over a period of 16 years of the firstborn 2 couples for the possibility of malformations, and they looked at almost 72,000 couples, and they found that trisomy 21 has a 4.5-fold increased risk when the paternal age is more than 45 compared to men of 30. So it is not that just the woman's age that matters, it is the age of the man when the child is conceived that does matter regarding congenital malformations. And this, I know it is a graph that is very busy, but if we look at the maternal age and the paternal age and the relative risk of autism, you see the higher the maternal, higher the paternal, the risk of autism, relative risk is almost 5.75. That means compared to a person who is having a child at around 27 to 30, as the age crosses 45s and 50s, there is a 390% chance increase of having these spectral disorders of autism spectrum. And this study was done in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, West Australia. What is happening to our health? What is happening to the sperm count? If it was analyzed between 1930 and 1990, when Swan et al. Published this data in 2000 in the British Medical Journal, you could see a dramatic decrease in the sperm count over time. But it does not mean that male factor contributing to infertility is increasing that much. So what exactly do sperms do? When the sperms are deposited in the vagina, there are 100 million in the ejaculate. The highly hydrated cervical mucus selects only the morphologically normal sperm with good motility and sperms with a low content of polyunsaturated fatty acids, and allows them to come into the cervical canal where there are 1 million sperms. But into the uterine cavity, only around 1 lakh sperms get in, because of the elimination of all the non-functional sperms, the leukocytes, the ones that don't have a acrosomal reaction, the ones that don't undergo timely capacitation. In many animals, uterotubal junction forms a very significant filtration process, but not in human beings. And at the level of the isthmus, there are around 10,000 sperms, and isthmus acts as a place of storage. And in the various folds of the tubal epithelium that occur, this acts as a storing place for these sperms where they undergo capacitation. And with ovulation, when there is a chemotactic responsiveness with the level of the different hormones that are there in the tube at the time of ovulation, which are being picked up, and the motility and the concentration of these proteins and hormones decreases as it comes here. The highest concentration is at the place of the oocyte. So based on this chemotactic integrity and chemotaxis, the sperms with good DNA integrity undergo hyperactivation, and the morphologically normal and responsive sperms with an intact DNA are the ones which are released from the tubal epithelium, and in the tube, swimming against the ciliary action of the tubal epithelium, they manage to reach the cumulus, penetrate the cumulus, and only the morphologically normal sperms are able to bind to the zona, and these are the ones with the highest DNA integrity. So you can see the number of selection processes that are in place so that a perfect sperm manages to reach. What we need to understand is, for fertilization, we don't need a perfect sperm. Any sperm that manages to reach across the zona and the oolemma can fertilize. But if it is an abnormal sperm, it will lead to an arrest in the growth, arrest in the development, and we will have very less blastulation rates, very less implantation rates, and a very high pregnancy loss. So as I was telling you, the isthmic region serves as a reservoir, and from this place, with hyperactivation, detachment of the sperm occurs, and this sperm manages to reach the oocyte cumulus mass. So when we are doing an IUI program and all, it is not necessary to sit and wait for ovulation, confirm ovulation and do this IUI, because nature has provided that sperms do not swim across all over and then go and die within 3 to 5 minutes. The tubal epithelium has a storage place where the sperms bind and are released few at a time to try to reach the oocyte complex. And as we were seeing, there with the progressive decrease in sperm count, one of the factors that has been very closely associated is the global increase in production of plastic. So plastics, the various chemicals, the endocrine altering substances, the pollution, the water that is getting contaminated with the high content of lead, cadmium and other heavy metals, the food that is having very high content of pesticides and chemicals, all these are changing the way life goes on. And that is one of the most important reasons I feel for progressive decrease in the sperm count and comparatively higher incidence of low ovarian reserve in the female population. As such, male infertility was not a topic where a lot of research was done. But after the first human was born by successful use of ICSI by Dr. Palmero in 92, work into male infertility declined so much lesser. I mean, everyone lost interest in trying to find out why we are having these abnormalities. What do we think is going wrong? Because it was thought that you find a single normal motile sperm and a pregnancy is guaranteed because we can take it and inject it and do a ICSI. So we stopped concentrating on why the sperm count is less for this particular couple. As intrinsic as ovulation is, spermatogenesis is a very similarly organized process where there should be a hypothalamo-pituitary release of gonadotrophin release hormone, FSH, and if it is abnormal, if it is a hypo, this is one condition that can be corrected medically. Testes should not have damaged by endocrine environmental disorders. There should not be a genetic and epigenetic abnormality. There should be adequate number of spermatogonial tubules in the testis. There should be a functional epididymis and no infections causing an obstruction to the vas, or there should not be a genetic abnormality like a congenital bilateral absence of vas difference with cystic fibrosis mutation. And then only we will have adequate number of sperm count in the ejaculate, and we should not be having any varicocele. So a sperm consists not only of the DNA in its head. In a mature sperm, in the equatorial segment, there is a protein called phospholipase C zeta, which is absolutely essential for the activation of oocyte. So if this is absent, if this protein is absent, we will have total fertilization failure. There are sperm RNA, there is a role for centrioles, and this sperm RNA is implicated in the epigenetic regulation of the embryo. Proteins are not synthesized in the sperms. That means when the spermiogenesis is occurring, whatever proteins the sperm cell picked up during this developmental evolution process, these are the only proteins that the sperm is going to have. So if we can identify the sperm proteome by mass spectroscopy, later maybe we will be able to have more information regarding the man's fertility potential. And as I was telling you, these oocyte activating factors such as phospholipase C zeta, unless they are available, we will see only 2 pronuclei after doing an ICSI on the next day. We will not see an initiation of the embryo development. And the centrioles that are there in the neck, these are protein-based structures, and they are important for motility and also normal embryo growth. So every component of the sperm is important. And how did this sperm come? Going back a little to the basic sciences, mitotic proliferation of the diploid spermatogonia just at the base of the tubule. Later on, there is meiosis. This meiosis is necessary for the genetic diversity, and we get haploid spermatids, and these spermatids turn into spermatozoa with a very, very complex chromosome packing for effective delivery of the paternal genome to the oocyte to form an embryo. And when we look at these cells, these are haploid round spermatids. They transform into spermatozoa by making different morphological adjustments called spermiogenesis, in which the Golgi complex forms the acrosomal cap. The nucleus where the chromosomes were dispersed is tightly wound. The histones are replaced by protamines, leading to even more tightly bound. They're very neatly and organizedly packed to fit into the head. The centrioles come to the neck. All the mitochondria get concentrated in the neck, and all the tubules and the axial filaments form the tail. And this transformation goes from the basal towards the lumen, and men are able to produce sperms every day all through their lifetime from puberty because of the self-renewing cell division of the spermatogonial cells. So a basal cell that is here is not the cell that they are born with. It is a cell which underwent mitosis. One cell went ahead to form spermatic, and one cell went back to become the basal spermatogonial cell. And this tight junction at the base, where all these cells are supported by the Sertoli cells, is the blood testis barrier. So whenever we are doing a TISA, ICSI, micro TISA, we are causing a damage to this barrier, and we don't really have data on the presence of anti-sperm antibodies and all in these men in long-term follow-up after they have finished their fertility issues. So as I was telling you, normally the chromosomes in all other somatic cells other than the sperm cells, they're all in histones. But to make it more tight, these histones are replaced by protamines. And as the sperms move into the caput and come down, there is a difference in the epigenetic modifications that these sperms are undergoing at the caput, at the tail. As you can see, epididymis sends in proteins which makes more binding occur towards these, and this process is absolutely essential because unless these are occurring well, the final sperm methylation does not occur well, the silencing of the imprinting gene does not occur well. And that is one of the reasons why there is a higher incidence of imprinting abnormalities in children born to men who have had a TISA-ICSI, where we are picking up sperms here before the silencing of some of these genes occurs. And as I was telling you, the selection occurs at different places in the natural human body, making sure that out of the hundreds of millions of sperms, only 100 to 200 of the sperms that are capable of recognizing, binding and penetrating the zona, which have progressive normal motility, do manage to reach and fertilize. Therefore, male infertility is a multifactorial syndrome which has a wide variety of disorders. And there are almost 3,000 genes that are involved in male reproduction. So if we were to really look at male infertility, what we are doing is a semen analysis. Almost all of us do it. When there is a severe male factor, we do check out the karyotyping and we look at Y chromosome microdeletions, and different sperm DNA fragmentation assays are coming into vogue. But what we really need to also look into is the molecular genetics, where we look at abnormalities of Robertsonian translocation, reciprocal translocation, androgen receptor gene abnormalities, and a whole lot of other genes. MTHFR gene mutations are also associated with oligospermia. They're not only associated with neural tube defects, hyperhomocystinemia, high incidence of PIH, increased coronary artery disease and stroke. They also have a role in male infertility. There can be mitochondrial DNA mutations. We are yet to touch the iceberg of the microRNAs and the picoRNAs and the other RNA abnormalities. We are not yet looking into the protein abnormalities, the post-translation abnormalities and the abnormalities of the function, or the epigenetic phenomena where there are abnormal histones, protamines, DNA methylations, chromatin remodeling, hypermethylation and abnormality in histone protein changes. So unless we really could look into all these, what are we doing with this sperm? Just getting one sperm, and depending upon the level, we are either doing an IUI, IVF or an ICSI. But unless we really could explore these, we will not be doing justice to the men. And this is one concept that I found very interesting. It is the selfish spermatogonial selection. That means what happens is, as I was telling you, the spermatogonial cells from the base become two, one goes forward, one goes back. So it is not the original cell that was there. It is the cell that underwent mitosis, and one went forward, one went backward into the store. So if there is an abnormality, this is the store from which mitosis is going to occur. And these abnormal spermatogonial cells, they have these selfish genes. Initially, there will be involved in one spermatogonial cell. Then this cell manages to survive, and it occupies the whole of the tubule and progressively the whole segment, and then it can occupy the entire testis. So once there is abnormality, this abnormal cell tends to survive more, and as men age, this abnormal cell manages to occupy the entire testis, and some of these mutations can lead to seminomas. We've done ICSI and the couple has not conceived. We've done twice, and then if the pregnancy has not occurred, what do we offer them? Because we could find occasional motile sperms. We did get embryos, and there was a cleavage stage embryo. So in these couples, what happens was studied by these scientists, and it was published in 2018, where they found that if they continue to go ahead with ICSI for severe male factor, the pregnancy rate in the couples was only 12%. But when they decided enough is enough, let us go for donor sperms, and they used artificial insemination, the pregnancy rate was 44%. That means when we are offering ICSI for a severe male factor also, we need to set our limit. Say, this many cycles I'm going to do, not drag on the thing for multiple cycles. And this was one more concept that I found thought-provoking. When there is a female factor abnormality in infertility, like say a polycystic ovary or a tubal pathology, here we are going to try IUI, IVF, ICSI, or do a surgical correction and ICSI, because the problem is with the woman. But when there is azoospermia, when there is a varicocele that is contributing to a severe male factor, or in an unexplained infertility, where we, as I said, we haven't really explored the other causes in the man that could be contributing to infertility, we still go ahead and do an ICSI to the woman for no fault of hers. So essentially, in all our fertility treatments, whether the problem is with the woman or with the man, we end up doing as a last stage, subjecting the woman to IVF ICSI procedures. So we should be thinking, what are we doing? Looking at the empirical medical treatments for male infertility, none of them is very cheap. As you can see, and they're all not without side effects. Whether we use clomiphene, tamoxifen, they're associated with hot flushes, weight gain, gynecomastia, hair loss, dizziness, gastrointestinal side effects. Anastrozole is associated with decreased libido, elevated liver functions. And unless we have a clear-cut indication that it is a hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, whenever we use HCG and FSH injections, just look at the cost to which they're going through. And these are also associated with depression, gynecomastia, and hyperglycemia. So we should be very sure when we are giving empiric therapy, what is the reason we are giving it, and it should not be continued without proof of benefit. So repeating a semen analysis invariably after 2 to 3 months, and only if we see a benefit, should we be continuing these treatment protocols. All of us are essentially not dietitians, but there are, I feel we should be spending a little time talking to them, because of the increased red and processed meat intake nowadays, sweet drinks and snacks, low fiber diet, poor consumption of fish, poor vegetables, and fruit consumption, increased intake of omega-3 fatty acids, high energy density diet that people are consuming, with a poor consumption of nuts and seeds, because this itself can provide all the antioxidants, minerals, fibers, polyunsaturated fatty acids, calcium, zinc, magnesium, and vitamin E with just diet. This was one study that had looked critically into the oxidation reduction potential in infertile men with normal and abnormal sperm parameters. So as you can see from the data coming, whether it is from USA or Doha, Qatar, when the normal sperm parameters are there, there is less oxidative reactive oxidative species damage. Invariably across all countries, there is a high incidence of ROS damaging these sperms. And when we look at this oxidative stress, it could be when there is an inflammatory reaction like prostatitis and male axillary gland infections, which definitely need an antibiotics, anti-inflammatory therapy along with oxidative species. Or there could be lifestyle changes like smoking and obesity. Without these being corrected, just giving antioxidants is not going to help. Presence of a varicocele, clinical grade 3 surgery does lead to benefit. I know I've been talking a lot and giving you a headache, so I thought I will make things simple and look at what is the evidence that we have. So for that, I found this human reproduction update in 2017, a very nice analysis of 8 questions. The PICO analysis, that means the problem, the intervention, the comparison, and outcome questions, which were given as an evidence-based recommendations to the WHO. So in that, the first question that they tried to answer is, what is the prevalence of male infertility? As for this, as you can see, we have very few studies because it is very difficult to get this data right because wherever we try to gather data, it is from an infertility clinic where the population we don't see. We see a select population. And as I was showing you in the first graph, almost anywhere between 37 to 70% of the infertility is attributable to the male. And is it necessary for infertile men to undergo thorough evaluation, or can we just look at a semen analysis and go? No, we need a definite history, a physical examination. If we find an abnormality, sent to a male specialist, we definitely need a semen analysis. So the history should include medical, surgical interventions, sexual sexual ability and limitations, ask for cryptorchidism, scrotal infections, ask for lifestyle, ask for use of supplement, any history of malignancy. Physical examination should look at the overall habitus, obesity, muscle development, virilization, testis location, size, consistency, ductal structures, presence, absence, normal, obstructed, the cord, and analysis is the basic test done even today. Hormonal assays only if necessary, genetic assays only if necessary. So what is the clinical value of a traditional sperm parameter? In this, rather than a single parameter, several ejaculate parameters, it gives a better prediction, and this has a high level of evidence. And if we find any abnormality, then it is always better to repeat it. This statement also has a high level of evidence, and that's just common sense. And looking at the lifestyle factors, although obesity has a detrimental effect on many aspects of health, whether pure obesity is contributing to low sperm factor, we don't have much evidence. But because weight loss strategies, decreasing the BMI and waist circumference are important for health, we should encourage that, especially whenever there is morbid obesity, before we start any treatment, and we have moderate level evidence for that. Looking at the exposure to heat, whether it is occupational, clothing, body position, and looking at all the studies that are there on the semen quality or male factor, there is very low evidence, unfortunately. And smoking, because it has an adverse effect on the general health, it is recommended that men trying for pregnancy should abstain from smoking, which has a moderate evidence. Role of antioxidants surprisingly has a very low quality evidence. That's because rather than finding out the cause, any male factor, we don't have much armamentarium to investigate that, and we end up giving a lot of oral antioxidants, whether they're necessary or not. And for sperm motility, some amount of reactive oxidative species are also necessary. If those ROS was not there, sperms would not get hyperactivated. So giving antioxidants for all is not, does not give that much improvement in the pregnancy rates. And herbal therapies also, there is very low quality of evidence. And genetic screening being done for non-obstructive azoospermia and men with very low counts, that is less than 5 million, has recommending a genetic test is worth it. It has a high quality evidence. Y chromosome microdeletion should be performed in non-obstructive azoospermia prior to any therapeutic procedure like a TISA-ICSI. Cystic fibrosis mutation analysis should be offered to men with congenital bilateral absence of vas difference. Whenever there is a history of neoplasia and they're going in for cancer treatment, we need to talk to them about the effect of that cancer treatment on spermatogenesis and offer them sperm banking, although there is only moderate evidence regarding this. And if a person is not planning pregnancy later, although with the chemotherapy or radiotherapy there is azoospermia, we need to tell them that recovery is possible and they need to follow contraception. And there can be a slightly higher risk of congenital anomalies in their offspring, although the evidence is low. Because varicocele, we don't have very high quality evidence, but common sense says, and the good practice point is clinically palpable varicocele. Offer treatment, but keep in mind the female factor. And if there is a female factor that anyway needs an ICSI, rather than do a varicocele ligation and wait for the sperm count, go ahead with an ICSI program. And regarding varicocele ligation, we should talk to the couple based on different physicians' opinions and expertise regarding the ligation. So I hope I could clear some doubts, and thank you all for your patient hearing. And I think we are really blessed that at this point of time, we are still hale and hearty and healthy. And if you have any questions, please you're welcome to ask me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Your presentation was really an eye-opener, actually. And I'm taking the liberty on behalf of viewers and saying that you really gave us a new sense of somatogenesis in HT as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
As
So,
you had, yes, ma'am.
there was a question in the chat box. What
Yes,
can be done at a basic level for those who can't afford ICSI?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so as we've been seeing, when normally, like see, if the heart is there with so much muscle, it should beat at least 70 beats per minute. If it is beating at 2 per minute, it is not working efficiently. So like that, spermatogenesis is a process in which all through that huge spermatogonial tubules, multiple meiosis and 1,000 sperms are being produced every second to lead to 1,000,000 sperms in the ejaculate. If that is not happening, that means there is something wrong. So we should not say the wrong can be, you need to have a look. Is he a hypo? How do you know hypo? Lean, long people with very little secondary sexual characters, with little muscle mass, a voice that is not that masculine. So these are the people who tend to be hypo. So you do an FSH, you do an LH, you do a testosterone, and if they can afford going for giving HCG injection for 12 weeks, check the testosterone again. If it is improved, add HMG and get them to have spermatogenesis. Then you can optimize the women to have multifollicular growth and do an IUI program. But this is a very long drawn process. So if the sperm count is less than 1 million or less than 5 million, there is something going wrong. There is some mutation, there is some apoptotic program happening, and the sperms are not being produced. So you cannot force that to happen by any medications that we have available. Only thing, remember that sperm count is subject to so much fluctuations. That means we've had people who've just had a viral fever for some time, 2 months ago, and the sperm count was just 1 million. The man, I was telling them ICSI, but the man kept telling, no, madam, previously I had. Then we said, okay, fine, because both of us stuck to our points. We said, okay, fine, let's come to an agreement and let me do your semen analysis of 2 months and make sure that you exercise well, eat a lot of vegetables, fruits, don't have too much of stress, and find some amount of mental relaxation. And lo and behold, after 2 months, a person who I said was only less than 5 million had a 40 million one and proved me wrong by having a spontaneous conception. So this is what we need to remember. Is it consistently staying low, or is there a stressor that is causing the low count? So if there is a stressor, then we take out the stressor, advise them a healthy lifestyle. And if you think they need antioxidants, stick to one brand, one antioxidant, give it a trial for 60 days and have a look. Okay, I have another question on anastrozole in male infertility. Anastrozole in male infertility is for a select subset of people who have a low testosterone and a high estrogen level. So their testosterone estrogen, that ratio more than 10, less than 10, I keep forgetting that. So in that group of people with oligospermia, anastrozole helps. I haven't really used it because it leads to a lot of decrease in the libido. But I've come across reports saying that there is an improvement, and so when there is a decrease in libido, even if the sperm count improves, they hardly have intercourse. So it still doesn't lead to a pregnancy rate. So putting the medication and following it up with an IUI protocol is what we definitely need to do. Okay, anyone else? So
We'll wait for a couple of minutes for any additional questions.
what I find we are able to gather, like India is a country with such a huge population. So we will have a lot of infertile people, and half of them were having a male factor. So we should be able to generate very good data. The problem is that we don't make up our mind telling that this is the protocol I'm going to use. These are the medications I'm going to use. So if we were to put it in our head that for this count, for this type of person, this is the only antioxidant I'm going to use, because all antioxidants a little that way, a little this way, they're almost similar in their bioefficacy. So whichever molecule that you trust one, and then if we stick to that and observe over a period of a year, then we will be able to gather much data and tell with confidence that this is the molecule that works. Because we change brands so much that we are not able to gather data. Okay. Reactive oxidative species. Okay, fine. So whenever, as I was showing you in these slides, just a moment. Okay, so when the sperms are moving, the neck of the sperm, which is having the mitochondria, is the one that is very fast. It's like, I don't know whether you've seen the old-fashioned goods trains, where with coal they used to keep throwing into the furnace the steam that comes and gets the engine running. It is exactly the same phenomena that is happening at the level of the neck in the mitochondria for energy to be there for these sperms to move forward. So when there is a lot of energy being produced, some of the electrons which are supposed to go to produce the energy, escape, and these electrons will go and hit another membrane and push out more electrons, and this will hit someone, and that is the way these reactive oxidative species multiply. Normally in our body, we have enzymes that, like glutathione peroxidase, which take away and neutralize these reactive oxidative species. But these enzymes are there in the cytoplasm. During the process of spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis, what happens is all these enzymes that were there in the cytoplasm, after the sperm is packed, are thrown away, because the sperm cannot carry around that much cell. Ergonomically, like an aeroplane, you can't have a round aeroplane. You have to have an aeroplane which has that shape like that. You have to have a bullet train that has that shape like that, because ergonomically, for it to go fast, it needs that shape. You can't have a round bullet train. So sperms, to achieve the ability to swim fast, go from one place to one another in the shortest possible time with the least energy, made sure that they threw away everything that they thought was non-essential. That included the cytoplasm with the enzymes that are necessary to take care of the reactive oxidative species that are formed in high energy consumption by these mitochondria. Got it? So when when these reactive oxidative species come, what they will do, they will cause damage to the DNA, they cause damage to the cytoplasm, to the cytoplasmic membrane, and they make it less ability to move. And nature has made sure that every sperm that cannot move fast is destroyed at the different filtration processes. So any damaged sperm cannot reach naturally. So that is the process with reactive oxidative species. And so that is the reason why antioxidants are given in a higher concentration, so that the seminal plasma has antioxidants which help the sperm. And that is the reason why we should not let the sperms stay outside the body for long. That means when we are doing an IUI program, as soon as the sperm is ejaculated, as soon as the liquefaction is done, it should be prepared. And once it is prepared, it should be inseminated into the woman's body. So the highest pregnancy rates in an IUI program come when the ejaculation to insemination time is less than 90 minutes. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Padmaja.
Thank you, Gangadhar Garu.
You have nicely explained the molecular levels of spermatogenesis and all. Still, something I could not understand. I have to read again. And
yeah, that is what happened, sir. The thing
I will
is,
try, madam.
yeah.
You have told so many new things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So, Prachi, I think if we are done, we can call it a day.
Ma'am, yes, I don't find any additional questions. So thank you very much for this excellent presentation. It was wonderful to have you and a really nice presentation. So thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for giving us time, heartfelt time from the Shield family.
Thank you, and stay safe, everyone.
Yes, wish you the same, ma'am. Thank you.
You want to